Thank you, everyone. It's so great to be here. Thank you, Professor Hisa. And thank you to the Radcliffe Institute for the opportunity to be here and to be a part of this conference and this marvelous place of learning. Boy, my stamina somehow left the room. And also, such an honor and a privilege to both be here, but also to share the stage with these extraordinary artists that I am blessed to call colleagues. Ayodele Casel and Antoine Hunter. You have your programs, so I think you can read more about these extraordinary people there. And I'd love to just dive in to this conversation about embodied practice, embodied knowledge and research in our field that we're pretty attached to, called dance. But if you find dance somehow conjures up a bad performance of some kind, experience that you were forced to watch on PBS or something, which I love those programs, but allow perhaps the idea of motion and movement and, again, this theme of nonverbal communication to be conjured up as we talk about dance. So what you just witnessed was how we speak in dance. And we often talk to our students about writing in dance is dancing, choreographing. Making a performance public is our version of publishing. So thinking about our practice in those terms. And, you know, what does embodied language look like for each one of us in this room based on our experiences? And for us as dancers, our life experience, but also the teachers and the environments of learning that we came up through, and the traditions, the challenges, the triumphs. And so I thought that'd be a good place to start, is to talk about each of their histories with dance. And so maybe we can start with that. Maybe Ayodele, to start, you know, wondered if you could tell us a little bit about how you came to dance, who your influential teachers were, or what your influences were and are. What came to this moment of our expression?
Oh, yes.
Here at Radcliffe.
Well, what came to that is my intense desire to communicate and to be in communion with people, not just people that I share the stage with, but the people that that are here in the space. I actually started tap dancing much later, as far as, like, you know, most kids start when they're very, very young. I was a sophomore in college. I was an acting major at NYU, and my senior year in high school, I became really obsessed with old movies, specifically Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. I loved them. And I wanted to be Ginger Rogers. So much so that I even bought a prom dress that looked like one of her dresses. And it didn't really look like it, but in my mind, I was like, I'm Ginger Rogers today, you know? But I had started, that was my first, like, real, like, curiosity, other than when you're a child and you're, like, just dancing in your room for fun, you know? And so when my sophomore year, I had this chance to really take this class. I just was so excited. And I loved it. And it was the basics. It was my flaps and my shuffles and my maxi forwards. And I was the best in my class, which is not saying a lot because we were just a bunch of actors in a room and they didn't want to be there in the first place. But I was living my dream, doing this very, like, by rote sort of material. And then about a year into that, I met a young dancer who was a freshman. His name was Bakari Wilder, and he had grown up dancing. He was what we call, I mean, he was a hoofer. And he was working with Savion Glover on a show called Bringing the Noise, Bringing the Funk, which was premiering at the Public Theater. And we had a mutual friend, and he said, we happened to, like, be walking down the street, and he said, oh my God, you're both here. Bakari, you have to meet Ayodele. Ayodele, you tap dance and you tap dance, and y'all should get together. And I was so thrilled, because I'm like, yeah, I can, because I'm good, right? So I get to, he goes, yes, let's get together. So we go, we rent a space, and I'm putting on my shoes, And he puts on his shoes and he starts warming up, and this is what I hear. I'm putting on my shoes and I hear, and I just remember going, wait a minute, that is not what I was doing, because I had been doing falap, change, falap, change, falap, you know? And so that really quickly turned into a private lesson. It was supposed to be a jam session, but it was like, no, you don't know what you're doing. But you know, he started to tell me like, oh, wait a minute, you don't, it was the first time that I understood that tap dancing wasn't a series of steps, and that it was just it wasn't just vocabulary, that it was a mode of expression and a mode of communication, and specifically that it was attached to history, and that it was attached to a legacy that I had been previously unaware of. And so for me, it completely turned everything on its head, and I became super obsessed with wanting to learn everything about it, and it. From an identity perspective, as a Black and Puerto Rican woman who in the 90s, we're talking about before the Latin explosion, before diversity and inclusion was even something that was on the tips of people's tongues, I didn't see much representation. And so to find out that this thing that I was so attached to and that drew me to it was really heavily steeped in a rich, wonderful, sophisticated, elegant, beautiful expression of Black people in this country, it really burst open my heart. And I have been with it and trying to do my absolute best to represent it as much as I can. But that is how I came to tap dancing in a nutshell.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Antoine.
So for me, my story is slightly different. Well, just before I get started. I guys want you to copy me. Do this hand shape here. Now do like this. That means yes. Now do this hand shape. There you go. Now do this movement. That means no. So if I say, do you understand? You can say yes or no. So communication is important for me. So do you guys understand so far? Yeah. All right, good. We're on the same page.
Born in Oakland.
I was born in Oakland, California. We had a value of community.
Become my community too.
And that community was shared with language as well as culture.
My family.
My family identifies as African American. Oakland is home of the Black Panthers. A lot of advocacy, rights movements. So it was difficult and different for me to be the only person who was deaf who communicates with sign language. So my single mom, she was trying to pick up language here and there to communicate. Oftentimes, I wouldn't have that access to signing. So whether it was a deaf role model or adult or programs, I wasn't exposed to that. So it was difficult for me. I couldn't follow what was going on television. If I did see something on television, there wasn't captioning at that point. People would be laughing, and I'm like, oh, that's my cue to start laughing. But not actually know if I was laughing, what I was laughing at, or be off cue. And know what's actually going on TV. So I had that experience of not being able to express myself. Then there was a chance I went to the Oakland Ballet. I think I was about 8 years old. It was so beautiful, colorful, vibrant. The men and women, the performers, on stage. I laughed. I laughed so hard I almost blurted out. And people were all looking at me. And I saw, oh, wait, they're laughing too at the same time. I felt at home. Dance was a way for me to communicate, to understand what was going on. My mom couldn't afford at that time for me to go to dance class, so I had to wait till high school. And then it was at Skyline High School. You know, it's the same, just by the way, it's the same high school Tom Hanks went to. Just saying. So as a performing artist, I was so involved with all the club activities and such. I try to be very involved and engaged. But it was difficult because I was, again, the only deaf person within the dance group. So think about that. So how would I be able to have a date, develop a best friend? But guess what? Everyone in the dance class, they were so focused on dancing, so I couldn't get a date. So check that off my list. I tried to just be a part of the group and participate. My dance teacher at that point wanted us to work on a dance, and we did some group work. So I was like, oh, hey, I want to work with you. No? Can I work with you? You? No one wanted to work with me. And they said, you know what? My teacher said, go ahead and why don't you develop and choreograph a solo. So I had to pick music at this point. You guys might know this song. And I will always love you. So you know it. Okay. So I had to work on my interpreter, had him do that vocal, but you know.
Who sung that?
Who sings that song?
Whitney Houston.
Whitney Houston.
My wife too.
That's my wife too. Just let you know.
But I was dancing to that song.
So I was dancing to that song, and I just felt so much emotion and a rush.
Who was looking at me?
And people were looking at me.
Something changed in them.
And I just remember something changed in them as my audience. My dance teacher asked, what do you guys feel from them? And I was nervous at that point, but the students say, we felt that you were cold. Felt that you were evoking that you were alone. And that was that. Actually, just it. I communicated, and I had that connection. And I wasn't alone anymore. At that moment, that's when dance was my love, and I just fell in love with it and continued with all different types of dance. I realized through all the different engagements of the different types of dance, there is no limit. And I love it. And here I am today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
What I'm struck by is that the themes of home, understanding, and meaning come through what you're talking about. And I think it's a special quality that dance holds. It's a nonverbal art form that can hold all of this space for all of this. There isn't a limit to that, which is a special thing. And thinking again about this idea of language, how has language shaped how you see the world and how you approach your creative, artistic, and aesthetic work? So language, it could be the language of dance, but also because we have multiple points of entry and relationships to different kinds of language. So it's not just verbal language, but how has language writ large affected your creative and aesthetic and artistic work?
The other reason I'm also really attached and connected to this art form is because of my own personal struggle with language. When I was 9 years old, I moved to, I was sent to live with my grandparents in Puerto Rico, and I did not speak Spanish at all. And it was right as, I think a month of the school year had already started. So I was also just taken straight to school and put in this environment where I literally could not communicate. I knew one word. I knew how to say hola, that was it. And I remember the feeling of isolation and the anxiety attached to having thoughts and having emotions and not being able to say it. And even if I said it in English, it wouldn't be understood. And so that was, I remember that journey of even my grandmother really teaching me how to speak again, going through the alphabet, A, B, C, C, D, E, F, G. And I remember just that struggle. And then, of course, like children, we learn language and we pick it up quickly. And so I became really good at it. I was there for 6 years, but then I moved back to New York City, where I hadn't been practicing my English, and I went into 10th grade in public school in the Bronx, and I had the same experience where I felt very isolated and fearful of saying anything because I didn't want to mispronounce something, or just say the wrong thing. Like I remember I was playing Trivial Pursuit with my mom, and the thing said, it was silver screen, you know, the silver screen Trivial Pursuit, and it said, what couple had a famous rendezvous at a thing? And my mom was like, what? I said, what couple had a famous rendezvous? And she was like, let me see, that's rendezvous. I was like, you know, and I just remember feeling like, oh, this sucks. But when, you know, but I became really obsessed with like not wanting to feel that anymore, and I got a pocket-sized dictionary and a pocket-sized thesaurus, and I carried this with me all the time just so that I could not have that barrier. So when I found tap dancing, I didn't realize initially that that was the other thing that it had given me. It gave me an opportunity to express myself in this way without having to say a word, so that I could be in any room, in a room like this, in any room, and I can go shika sak. And like what you would connect with would be the feeling of that, you know what I mean, and not the words. And I think that is something that, I don't know, is really powerful. I think that what I love about that kind of communication and language, when we choose to communicate in this way, nonverbal, is that there's no barrier. I also think that rhythm is innate, and you know, it's in all of us, and we connect to it. And I think that I think tap is magic. I think there's something in it. There's something in that exchange and that listening of rhythm that people are really curious about, and I think that I want to think that everybody wants to try it. You know, that there's like nostalgia there for many folks, and that there's curiosity, and I'd like to tap into that. And I think that I have seen in my personal experience, it's the one thing that crosses gender, age, ethnicity. Yeah, it's like it doesn't matter. We all can connect on this, the power of rhythm.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Antoine.
For me, I can speak, you know, but can you guys understand me? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know that some people was like, yeah, it's some, but some, oh, you guys, obviously from here, yeah. But sometimes when I speak, people just start going, I'm like, I can't understand them, you know. And people sometimes didn't want to take the time to learn sign language. It's a beautiful language, it's just all the other session. And so, me trying to connect with people, it's so difficult. It felt like a monologue, you know. And I didn't mention before, before the solo, I felt so alone. I forgot to say that it was that close moment of my life where I took myself out of the world. Mm-hmm. I felt very suicidal because I couldn't connect with people. Mm-hmm. And people were making me feel my deafness was a curse. Something was wrong with me. Deaf and a man of color. But growing up, it was supposed to be bad when it should have been really the biggest gift to me. Mm-hmm. And my ASL, oh, so beautiful. It gave me a hand. Let me tell you how it gave me to understand myself a little bit better. If you put your hand like this, and you go, fire.
That represents fire. Take your hands like this. Here's the motion. That is water or the ocean. Now do this. In this movement. That is the air or wind. Now do this. These two hand shapes together represent earth. So for me, it's so important to know my history, to know my roots. As you know, well-rooted in African dance has such rich meaning. And it's the same thing with my language of American Sign Language. And I'll show you. Did you feel it?
Yes. Yeah.
This was part of me finding my own identity. That journey through dance, as just communicated. It's part of my DNA. It is who I am, as well as my rich roots in an African American history and those traditions.
Yeah.
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 Got it?
Yeah.
Do you understand?
I love how this also feels like a motorcycle. Like, yes!
Go.
So it's to state the obvious to say that dance is a non-verbal art form. It's a field of practice. It's a field of research. And it could be said that there's a certain kind of economy to non-verbal communication when compared to verbal communication. And so I wondered if you might talk a little bit about what for you are the unique opportunities for communicating through and with dance or embodied communication. And is that something you think about when you're making work or even in your teaching?
Yes, I mean, I think it closes, I mean, like we said before, it closes the gap of, between people. I tend to use literal words too in my work and storytelling. I feel like I want people to get it. I feel like tap dancing is one of those things that, because of its history, of sometimes like the minstrelsy and how they would depict. Like Bill Robinson, just like grinning and smiling, and it's the entertainment portion of something. People look at it as like a circus act sometimes, like it's like that fun thing that people do, and very often I'll like, sometimes when I speak to people, they'll go, oh, you did the, and they sort of make fun of it in that way. And for me, that is not cool, because I know just how deep and what was at stake and why it was created. And so for me, I feel like every opportunity that I get to dance and to create work and to show work, I feel a responsibility to bring its dignity back. And sometimes I don't want that, I don't want it to be misinterpreted, so I will not only give you the seriousness of and the complexity of the rhythm, but I want you to know these names. I want you to know this is history. I want you to know what this came out of, that this is an American art form, that it's an African American art form, that it came out of African people being brought here and their communication, their drums, being taken away, their source of power, the fact that Black people could start revolts across plantations through rhythm, and that when that was found out, they were silenced. And what happens to you when that's taken away? What happens? That violent act. What do you do? What do you do when you can't hit something? What do you do? You know what I mean? You do that because you have to. And so to me, there's something at stake every single time. So it's a time step, but it's not a time step. It's a falap, but it's not a falap. To me, it's You have to do that. It's, and I don't want that to be confused with I mean, that's pretty too, right? But that's not all that it is, you know? And so I find myself having to literally say these things so that there's no room for, you know, miscommunication. And so my work tends to just talk about the history a lot so that we don't forget those names, you know? So that it's not just, because who is the most famous tap dancer you think? Fred and Ginger, right? That's like most people think Fred Astaire, Gene Kelly. We think, you know, Eleanor Powell. Some people even say Shirley Temple. But, you know, and they are certainly a part of the history of it. But for me, like, I want people to know King Rustis Brown and John Bubbles and Bill Robinson and the Nicholas Brothers and Gregory Hines and Jimmy Slide and Baby Lawrence and Sammy Davis Jr. and on we go, and Savion Glover and boom, 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 boom. And then for me, the issue in that list is that there were no women. And that was problematic for me, you know? And so then now, I would say like what I find myself doing in my work, to be clear, is to let you know that there were women, and I had to go through a deep, deep, deep excavation to find these women, specifically these black women, because I knew Ginger Rogers. That's how I started tap dancing, you know, but I wanted to know who looked like me, because that's a different experience, you know. And there was no YouTube at the time. I had to really go through that search, you know.
And was it in New York City Public Library? Did you go? Or?
Well, I'll tell you, I happened to be, I was on the cover of this Village Voice thing, and the article was called The Hidden History of Black Women in Tap Dance. And I called the paper and I got the author's number. And then I called her, and then she told me that one of the women in the article, Jenny Lagan, was still alive at the time. And Jenny Lagan was the only black woman to dance with Bill Robinson, other than Shirley Temple. The only grown woman, like no other woman had ever been paired with her, other than Shirley Temple, who was a child and white, you know? And then she was the first black woman to be signed to any major Hollywood studio. So she was signed to MGM, the first black woman. And she was alive. She was in her 80s, and I called her. And I was like, Jenny, Miss Lagan, my name is Ayodele, and I'm a tap dancer from New York. And I was able to go. She was so surprised that somebody had reached out to her, you know? And I found her, and I went to see her, and then I found other women, and I I don't want to talk forever and ever, amen, but because I have to bring their names into the space, so I want to tell you who else I found. So I found Jenny Lagan, Lois Bright, Louise Madison, Juanita Pitts, Mildred Candy Thorpe, Baby Edwards. I found Ludi Jones. I found Alice Whitman. I found Juanita Pitts. I found Cora LaRed. I found all of these women who were right there with the men, you know? And more that I can't, you know, but, and that was it's really important to me. It's really important to me. So when you see me dance, I feel like I want people to acknowledge that it's not just me, that I come with a legacy.
Thank you for bringing them into the space and for that. Yeah.
I can do 10,000 tandus over and over. I believe in the technique of the work, but I don't want people to trivialize it and say, oh, this deaf person can dance. No, there's work behind it. Work.
There's so much we have to share.
As opposed to just being viewed as someone who's deaf, there's so much more for you to share. The Urban Jazz Dance Company, they have a deaf dancer. And he does On Point.
More theatrical dance.
more of a theatrical dance.
I'm a professional trained dancer.
A lot of professional trained dancers,
With them.
and there's very high expectations for them.
Sometimes a low expectation.
But sometimes it's a lower expectation and say, that's okay.
Well, you want to dance.
But if you want a job to dance, and you want to dance for these larger companies,
You have to work
you got to work at it. You can't be passive and just accept that one view of being labeled as someone who's deaf. So again, thousands and thousands of those tandus till you bleed. What I would say was, I think dance saved me. Being a black, deaf dancer. But I remember one time, there was a front page article that I came across. And the headline says, Antoine Hunter, leading man. His body is incredible. Look at those muscles, glistening. He did an incredible jump. And also, he had some sloppy feet. And that was real.
It was pretty bad.
It was pretty bad, actually. Didn't have that great footwork. But it was because prior, no one at that point previously had been able to address me directly and give me that feedback. It's a huge deal in your profession, in your craft. But no one told me the truth. People wouldn't hire me because of that item. So I had to work at it tirelessly. And I try to bring that back to my dancers. When children come to my class, I don't singly just praise them. I say, I want more.
Put your hand like that.
Put your hands like this. Copy me. This is another sign in American Sign Language. Represents more.
The baby's that.
You know how you teach those little kids that?
Wonderful word.
But it's a great word. Just say, hey, you're doing great, but guess what? I want more.
And I think, people won't take us really seriously. Unless we really show them we can do, like hearing people.
So it's one of those things where we want to be taken seriously as our hearing colleagues and not be viewed as just a deaf person. Therefore, my product, my craft will be inferior. My dance will be inferior. I want to be on par with those colleagues. Just the fact that we dance and can do so at a high level as a deaf person,
They can see them.
now you can see the meaning and the metaphors behind my dance.
They told him one day I made up a dance about deaf people.
One time I choreographed a dance about a deaf person going through the justice system,
They couldn't see the message.
but they couldn't see the message
The surface.
because all they saw was, oh, it was a deaf person dancing and didn't see the meaning.
But after that, it's up to
But after that, I acknowledged, okay,
the message of the dance.
did they really understand the message and how critical it was?
What you say? I don't want to say greedy.
I don't want to use the term greedy, but yeah, no, I want more. I want more.
That makes sense.
Does that make sense?
Okay.
Okay, all right. Thank you for reaffirming that.
I love that especially with students, the work of dance is also, that's a nonverbal equalizer. That the seeking of that work across a whole host of different ways that people come to dance, that is a very powerful nonverbal piece to what we do. So when you're developing choreography, what is the process of creating the movement vocabulary? If we talk about nonverbal communication, and we have physical vocabulary. How do you create that movement vocabulary? Do you have a unique aesthetic that you work with each piece? Or is the body of your work a certain aesthetic and you develop the vocabulary from there? How do you develop vocabulary when you're making new work?
Language.
I would say for me, I'm fortunate to have American Sign Language, which has an inherent movement to it.
You already saw.
You guys saw with fire, wind, earth, those elements, how I was able to incorporate that within dance.
I do the music too.
Music itself is a language.
I do a lot of jazz music.
I do a lot of jazz music. Hardcore, Miles Davis. Dizzy. You know those folks. Folks that I looked up to. So I would be at home, turn that music up, and I would be jamming. I would then incorporate that to my soul and my body, and then I would move. Some people would say, oh yeah, you can, as a deaf person, you can tell the vibration, right? But when you're dancing, you cannot. You don't have that advantage. Especially if you're in a leap or a jump, you're transitioning in air. You don't have that ability, but it has to be within you. And then go with it. So that's part of the work that we have to incorporate.
That's another way, the community.
It's another way of just taking the experience of the community and kind of just breathe it in and expressing that language.
What's happening in the world?
So it's kind of just a reflection of what's happening globally and within society.
On earth.
It's about just being honest and having that real dialect. Not just the superficial and the fairy tales, but those icebreakers to really get down to that real nitty-gritty, to have those conversations.
A lot of things people don't want to talk about.
There's a lot of things that we don't want to talk about.
They can't talk about it.
Therefore, we can't talk about it. But if we start moving.
It could be a really dark process for me.
At one point, it was a very dark process for me.
It has the power to heal.
But dance has the power to heal, from my perspective and experience. It has the power to bring a community together. The language of dance. I mean, I can go deeper than that for sure, but that's what it means to me.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the music aspect, and I love those references of jazz because tap dancing and jazz grew up synonymously. I mean, right next to each other in this country. So yeah, music informs a lot of how we start, what groove, you know, what feeling you want to convey. When I work with other dancers, I always ask them who they are, what culture they come from, what are their traditions, and I like them to explore that. Having grown up in Puerto Rico, Latin music is a huge influence in my life. I love dancing to it, and because it brings me so much joy, I tend to want to, work with it a lot. I think that that's another way that we reveal who we are in our medium is by actually bringing in our traditions and how we grew up, and finding those commonalities and exploring that. And there's power in that exploration. I worked with just recently. I did a show called Diary of a Tap Dancer, and there was a young tap dancer, super talented. His name is Andre Imanishi, and he's Japanese and Jamaican. Born in the Bronx, but grew up in Japan and came back, and he has all of these things, and he's young, and he's trying to process, he's an incredible tap dancer, he's processing all these things, and I asked him, I said, what do you want to bring in? And, he hadn't thought about it yet, and so he thought, there's the taiko drum, and so he explored that, and then by his exploration, then he shares it with people, and that's just another way that we all connect, So I think our who we are, literally who we are, what our experiences are, I always try to bring that to what I choreograph and the work that I make. I don't know any other way. I think it's so interesting. I love asking people where they're from. I mean, hopefully I'll get to know all of you after this, but I love that. I think I just feel like so many people don't make the effort to have an in, to make that connection. And all it takes is just to say, where did you grow up? And then see what happens, from there.
Thank you both. And I'm reminded of a quote, I think it was Yo-Yo Ma, and maybe he was borrowing the quote, but in any case, heard it from him of art is borderless. You know, so the experience of the young dancer you're working with, there isn't, dance can sort of, it doesn't even observe those boundaries. You know, those are sort of fake structures of commerce as opposed to the power of what you're both talking about in dance.
If I could add a comment.
Certainly.
For me, the language of it took time to really develop, you know, I mean, because sign language and dance, two combinations together that people get like distracted, you know, I mean, you saw the African, which was a little bit easier, because that's in my DNA for sure. You know, the fire, earth, water, it's already in African dance. Now, ballet, on the other hand, whoa, that's like the, you know. And so I incorporate a lot in and I try to develop the drum and to make sure that it makes sense to deaf culture, you know, like pure mind language, which you saw, palm, center, area, make sure it's very clear for them. And then plus, hearing people to try to get it, and then respect the technique and the form that I learned traditionally, you know, like respect it like in a martial art way, you know what I mean, honor that passed on, you know what I mean. But I had a lot of training from Paul Taylor, you know, and I never really want to just do it in my way. No, he gave it to me. I want to make sure that's there and put my language too in there, but respectfully, you know what I mean? That takes so much time. I know. You know, I fight with myself with that. You know, it's a debate where who do I want to please in my language? The community or me? You know, sometimes I have to say, I love you guys, but it's about me now. You know? And then, oh, I want you guys to learn. Okay, fire, that. And I don't understand it. I understand it. You understand it? You know what I mean? Well, it's to continue teaching myself and teaching people out there. You know, I think it's really cool, but whoa, it's just a lot of work.
It is. Well, and I think it's one of the interesting things that dance can offer in terms of nonverbal communication is a relationship to time that is different than our sort of speedy phone digital culture can offer. It is a different relationship. It takes so much time to craft this language. And it's analog, no matter how able the body, it takes the time the body takes. There's no app to develop what either of these two extraordinary artists are talking about. And I think that's something that we in particular can offer as a kind of antidote to the speedy, you know, the sort of lowercase I in front of everything in our lives, you know. I have two final questions. One, perhaps we can spend a little time on, and then a preface to the second question. Ayodele, I know that you've been doing a lot of town halls, especially with young people, and speaking about identity and owning your story. And Antoine, I know part of your work is working with abused women in your community. And so I wondered if you might both speak a little bit about how you've used dance in what can seem like an unlikely way. How have you used this language to transfer beyond the field itself?
That's a good question. God, it all seems so connected. Like I just feel like, you know, I mean, it's kind of like what I was saying in the last about Andre, for example, young dancer. Always, for me, when I work with young people, especially young people of color, Black, Latino, brown, I'm constantly Janine Tesori, who's like one of my mentors and friends, when she won the Tony, she said, you know, for young women, you have to see it to be it. You know, you have to see it to be it. And I think that I'm so aware of like what my own experience was growing up in the Bronx, and when I came back to New York. I remember going to my guidance counselor and saying I wanted to go to NYU, and the first thing he said, this is the person who's supposed to like guide me to the next thing and encourage me. He said, "Oh, that's a very hard school to get into." I also remember. So when I got in, he was the first person I went into. I was. You know, take that. But because like society is like was constantly telling us, you know, that we weren't as intelligent, or our communication skills weren't great. Our language, wasn't enough. The way we looked, we didn't measure up to, what was popular. There was no representation whatsoever in, on screen, or very, very little. Rosie Perez was the only Latina actress at the time. And that was my only reference. I would talk and people say, "Oh, you remind me of Rosie Perez." I don't think I look like Rosie Perez, nor did I think I really sounded like her exactly, but I just felt like how limiting that was, how limiting it was that I kept getting these things. And so not wanting that to be anybody else's experience, and also having seen my life and where my life has gone, despite all of that. All right, despite those stereotypes and despite those expectations or lack thereof, I feel like every time I get in front of a room with young people, I hope that I am that person that they go, "Oh, I'm not just my corner of my block, I'm not just the string of bodegas, or I'm not just where all they offer is, 25-cent potato chips, and, there's no Whole Foods in sight, and there's no, our communities don't look like, wealthy communities." And so I want them to know that they can be anything they want to be, right? And then part two is that they already hold that dance, social dance. Those kids, they have it down. I mean, they teach us, we were downstairs doing all kinds of nays and, but they have it in them, they have it in them. So I feel like I'm always trying to let them know that they are their own source of pride, and that anything that they create will most likely be copied, because I feel like a lot of Black culture is co-opted very, very quickly, and brought to the mainstream. So, I mean, that's in short.
Right.
Yeah.
I'll try to be really short. I remember there's a father that my son is a boy, yeah, and he was like, "I'm a girl." But father, no, my son is the boy. And I come out of nowhere, jumping in the conversation, and going, "Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, to decide you want to create a ba. You come over here, you come over here, you come over here." I mean, they tell you, it don't have to be that way. You can choose your own identity. You can be he or she or it, or maybe a spider, or maybe a butterfly, or maybe a unicorn. Because with that connection with yourself, it helps you understand yourself better, able to love yourself better. Then that ability can connect parent to children, teacher to student, bar to work. Connecting, the beautiful thing. To learn about yourself is growth. When you take the time to listen, you grow together in the community. That understanding, there won't be so much war with each other and with ourselves, because we keep telling, fight you, my identity. That's who I am, that's who I am. Listen to me. Yeah. They decide to try to tell me I'm hearing impaired, I need to be fit, but I say I'm deaf and I'm beautiful. That's who I am, that's my identity. Please love me for who I am. That father, he had a second look. He had the time to think. I don't know what the change happened after that, but I saw a process, something going on, because it was so resisted. That movement that I made with the dance, I think, rather than hearing it, he saw bark, bark, bark. You over here, and I have to be bold. It was outside. It was just outside the show, and having a communication. You know, I hope something positive came out for me. But that's one example.
Thank you. Thank you. To give a little context to the final question, we've been talking about our collective mission, both here at the Dance Center, but also these two colleagues have helped to advance that mission here, but also this is a collective mission that we share, and sort of our calls to action collectively. So to give context to this last question, we're thinking about what creates the conditions and spaces for humanity, equality, and dignity for all. What constitutes welcome in a space? What is what the ICA now and many people are calling a radical welcome? What does the embrace look like, not in a singular way at a learning institution or where we're teaching, but what does embrace look like for everyone we want to embrace, which is everyone? Thinking about how does dance make a true incursion into the culture? How do we support, champion, advocate, activate, expand, foster? And that word always reminds me of Professor Deborah Foster, who's here in the audience, who's a phenomenal artist and educator, fostering progressive cultural change in the field of dance and in the greater culture. And how can we learn from this enterprise? How can this extension and exchange through and with our field expand knowledge in our field, create the change in our field, and create greater cultural change? And then promoting agency for student artists, professional dancers, choreographers, audiences, communities, citizens, our fellow neighbors. And a few quotes. From Dr. Cornel West, deep education requires a habitual vision of greatness. I would say these two exemplify that. And I know we're short on time, so I'm trying to truncate on the fly here. Dr. Cornel West also says you have to be a thermostat rather than a thermometer. A thermostat shapes the climate of opinion, a thermometer just reflects it. Rabbi Joshua Herschel, our goal should be to live life in radical amazement. Get up in the morning and look at the world in a way that takes nothing for granted. Everything is phenomenal. Everything is incredible. Never treat life casually. To be spiritual is to be amazed. Two last dance quotes. Judith Jemison, who's a dancer, choreographer, and director. You have to dance unencumbered. There's no other way to move. The idea of dance is freedom. It is not exclusiveness, it is inclusiveness. Dance is bigger than the physical body. When you extend an arm, it doesn't stop at the end of your fingers because you are dancing bigger than that. You are dancing in spirit, and I would say an ecumenical, non-denominational way. And then lastly, Pina Bausch, who's a choreographer, famously said, I'm not interested in movement, I'm interested in what moves people. And so to that end, I ask you both, what moves you?
Those quotes seem like...
Oh, well, that's ours.
Just to the example. I mean, first of all, just get out there in the world, yeah, and just copy me. So here, there, and about it.
For me, this is a way to tell the world and to state emphatically about inclusion, being part of one energy. We don't have to be isolated, but together being one. And together, not single flames of a candle, but together being one fire of energy. As I've said before, dance is a way to communicate to the world, communicate with ourselves internally, no matter the demographic or the dynamic. We have to be careful in knowing there's so much to learn, whether it's movement, that dance that we all can express is individual. It's individualized, therefore it's unique. So you have to have a relationship with it. You have to embrace it. So take time to listen to yourself. Have a conversation with yourself through art. Do you understand?
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Ooh, I love that so much. I love that so much. I was going to say, I think what moves me, and I don't think I've ever really articulated this, although I feel it often, is what moves me and what I love, to this day, I love putting on my tap shoes. I get like a little kid, I can't wait to like lace it up and hear what the first sound is going to be. I'm that in love with it. But what moves me is the power that it has to know that we enter a room and that nobody knows what's going to be experienced. Some people are skeptical or tired or maybe not really into the dance thing that's going to happen after such a long day, and that by the end of the day, by the end of that experience and that exchange, that you lean into what it is that we are sharing. That you see yourself and you see that it sparks something in you. And that you start to look at art and artists differently, not as this performance thing that's out there, but it's something that we share and that we're all in it together, And I love that.
I'm moved by both of you. And truly to have this opportunity to be here. Thank you once again. And I think we can turn it over to a few questions from the audience. Should we make sure that we can translate or interpret properly with questions? There's a mic here, perfect. And perhaps we can use, choreographer Liz Lerman is a big inspiration to all of us here. And she has a process called critical response process for artistic process. And in giving feedback and asking questions, I wonder if we might consider not having an embedded opinion, but offering an opportunity to answer a question that would be an exchange. So fire away, anyone that has any questions.
Hi.
Hi.
You mentioned that dance was very helpful for you in learning how to communicate, but also a way of feeling less isolated. And I'm just wondering what you think the relationship between dance and mental health could be, or potentials you see for that.
Do either of you want to?
Great question. I think it would have a tremendous impact. I can recall one woman, and she had very unique challenges in trying to find strategies for coping and for managing her stress and anxieties. So she started in movement. Just weird movements. Not really choreographed, just movements, sporadically.
I talked with someone earlier today. We were talking
And I spoke with someone earlier here today, actually.
too much.
Sometimes that we just overthink things. And you're just in the hustle and bustle of the city, but thinking outside of this urban, crazy, hectic area. Just visualize taking a peaceful nature walk.
Away from the city.
Just away from that hustle and bustle. Just something simple as that can have such an impact and be so helpful just for an individual to feel free.
Be free to move.
Free to move.
Don't be scared to move.
Not to be judged and not to be restricted.
Angry.
And be able to evoke those various emotions. And it's so powerful, whether it's happiness, joy, sadness, fear.
You become like a thing.
And if you don't, it's almost like a feeling of being insane and you need to express yourself.
Really helpful for a lot of people.
And it's so helpful for so many people when it comes to mental health.
I've seen people trying to walk again.
I've seen people who are trying to physically learn to walk again. They're going through physical therapy and perhaps it's not being successful. But guess what? Here comes that movement. I've seen it. And that starts that process. And then walking again because of dance.
Yeah.
I would say it's also a community practice for the most part. There are times when we get into the studio and work alone, but I've seen the effects both even as professionals, even for us to get into the room and start moving helps our mental health too. I think being in motion actually sometimes helps to clear some of those thought clouds, you know, and the anxiety around thinking about what might happen. And especially with students, I would say it's particularly impactful for being a de-stressor because you're with others and there's a kind of vulnerability and a tenderness to being in that physical practice with other people in a safe environment that can be really helpful. And I think that's transportable. You don't have to be in a particular place to create that, you know, with a group of people. It could be anywhere. Do you have anything?
I echo both of those things. I agree, dance.
Hi, I'm very, very grateful to all of you. I'm an artist also, and I'm a classical musician, I'm a pianist. I also improvise in other styles, and I love dancing, and I totally agree that rhythm is at the bottom of so much of what we are and how we connect to the universe and to each other. I also grew up as a oppressed minority member where I came from. I'm an Armenian from Turkey. And I got into classical music partly because Armenian identity was so suppressed and oppressed and co-opted, I think. I mean, this is making me think of that. But I also do agree that it is possible to express all the universal feelings and experiences through any medium that one works on and tries to master. And I do have a question. A problem I have since becoming politically more aware and more active is that I find myself often compelled to get into the verbal arena and want to investigate, want to look at things, you know, whether it's, usually it is hidden, deceitful things, whether it's at the town level or the national level. It's not what is obvious that everyone is discussing, but little things that are being glossed over. And I find that distracting to myself as an artist, as somebody who just wants to be. And I also like to write about science, but that's different. That's kind of a connected thing. I just want to know if either of you, any of you, have felt a similar conflict of expressing political involvement verbally and in an alone way, and not only through your art, and how you have resolved that conflict. Thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, I think that there's probably not a person in this room that can't relate to that feeling of, you know, going down the rabbit hole of social media, where you start engaging with people you don't even know. You want to let them know what you think. Next thing you know, your hair is standing on end, and you're like, who am I? And I think that that's just part of, you know, this is part of life, and, you know, that's, how can you avoid that? But I will say that you have to go back to your joy. That's how I do it. I have to physically remove myself away from the computer and into a space that I know is healthy, that will reinvigorate me, that, and that will just sort of fill up the joy meter. You know, because along with that is the sanity and the love And the, I don't know, you can't ignore that. You can't neglect that. That's what I mean. You can't neglect it. And so, always go back to your music, you know, because I feel like that's when we operate from that place is where we can actually make the most change, right? I feel like we can't really, if you're tight, it's hard, you know. If you're open.
Yeah, joy is generous.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question as the clock goes 0.
Oh, sorry again.
Last question. First, I just want to say thank you, just to witness not just the technical proficiency, but beyond that, the exuberance with how you dance was a joy to behold. So thank you for sharing that with us. I'm a psychiatrist by trade, and one of the things that I do is I work with professional musicians that have dystonia. And when that happens, there's a break in the ability to play. And since artistic communication through music for them is an inherent part of their identity, I wanted to kind of draw the parallel for, as a professional dancer, for you. What if, come tomorrow, you all of a sudden lost the vehicle of your mode of communication, your identity, and you couldn't dance? How would you tap into that same exuberance and joy? And what mode of communication would you use?
Wow, it's a great question. Do you want to? It's a scary question too. Ooh. Oh, there's something happening.
Fine. Yeah. No. I'm just.
Oh, you're thinking. Okay. No, it's okay.
Yeah, it is. But I mean, we don't have to think to dance, but move. Yeah, you know what I mean? To breathe is to move. Like the fish, when they sleep, it's still moving. The gills, they're still moving. You know what I mean? So the molecules and everything is alive. You know, if that earth is constantly moving, whether you hear it or not, whether you feel it or not, it's still shifting and moving. You know? And I think awareness, whatever the challenge is, you continue to look at that, what's happening. So keep looking at that, what's that feeling, what's that going. Yeah. My community with people with disabilities, who's deaf, all of that, we're constantly exploring our own movement, our own words, you know. When you find it, that's your truth. That's yours to keep. Yeah. People try to take my sign language and dance away and say, that's not dance. But the truth is, it was mine. I had to own it and teach them why it's mine. You know what I mean? So, I'll leave it like that, yeah?
I mean, I think finding community would be, you know, joy is not career specific. So I think it would depend on the ability, you know, what could we continue to move or not, but even then, that feeling, that soul craft of joy, you know it when you feel it. So to find, maybe it would be a redirection, but it would be community. And I think we cultivate that so much as dancers of our community and wanting that to extend beyond it as well, you know. So I think finding those shining eyes that resonate with the same kind of joy, I think it would be something in there. But thank you for the opportunity to think about that. It's at once daunting and vulnerable and also important. And I think with that, I'll hand it over to Professor Kuriyama once again. But thank you so much for being here. Thank you for the opportunity to be here, Ayodele and Antoine. Thank you to our interpreters. Thank you also. The floor is yours.
So to conclude, I want to teach you one Japanese phrase. Probably most of you haven't studied Japanese, but if there's one phrase, it isn't sayonara. It's a little more complicated, but you can repeat it with me. Ichigo ichie. Ichigo ichie. And what it means, it's a expression from the tea ceremony, and it literally means one encounter of one lifetime. And it expresses the idea of the tea ceremony where the tea master serves tea to a small number of guests, and sometimes there's the master's friends. But the idea is that you serve and you concentrate in the ceremony as if this is the one and only time that you'll be able to do this, right? And you treat each encounter as a precious thing, as lasting for the lifetime. I think this last session exemplified precisely that spirit. And I think it's true for all of our speakers. And I'd like to sort of first thank all of our speakers for being such wonderful presences with us today. I'd also like to thank Becky Wasserman, who, you can't imagine the incredible amount of work that she put into making this possible. So I'd like to give a big hand. I'd like to thank all of you for coming and certainly for staying to the end. I know many of you have wanted to discuss more with our presenters. And so I'd like to invite you all now to the reception to pursue further conversations and engage more with our presenters. So thank you all very much.